Hi, welcome to Steaming It Up Anywhere. I am Kristen Brenison at NIU STEAM, and today we have Eric Callenborn with us from Oak Lawn Community High School. Hey, Eric.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
Great, thank you for having me.
Great. Yeah, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to hear about you and I, every time we talk, have got great ideas that bounce back and forth. So I'm excited to have you share some of those. But first, could you tell us a little bit about what you teach and what you do over there at Oak Lawn?
Sure, it's my first year at Oak Lawn, ending my first year. It's actually about, and I've lost track of time now, but it's about 15 years in the classroom for me now. I started student taught at Shepherd High School, Community High School District 218. I wanted a job there once I loved it there, but they weren't hiring at the time. So then I got a job at Lockport Community High School teaching English for 2 years. I ended up coming back to Shepherd teaching English, and I was the head coach of the speech team and the group interpretation, started an improv team there, and I was there for about 12, 13 years, and then I wanted to move up, and there was a position open at Oak Lawn Community High School, and I am now the department chair of art and music, fine arts department chair at Oak Lawn Community High School, but I still teach three classes of English, so it's a very interesting job. I am currently also working on my endorsement in art, so starting next year I'll also be teaching an art course as well as the English classes. There's
Ooh,
a lot going on over there.
that sounds like a lot of fun. And on top of it all, you are also part of LitX, right?
Yeah, I kind of have it's a non-official nonprofit. We're not like, we don't, we don't have tax status or anything like that, but it's a collective of teachers that basically just the lit X to X is variables. You know, we work to teach with all sorts of literacies, gaming, uh, comics, film, music, television, pop culture related items. So we do a lot of professional programming at a lot of Comic Cons and educational cons across the country, and even some like free webinars here and there over, however we can do them.
Yeah, they're a fun group. I've enjoyed some of the programming that we saw at C2E2, and um, you know, fun. Anytime you can bring pop culture into it, it's a blast.
Absolutely.
So you and I have talked a little bit about the idea that we talk about STEAM, but STEAM is so much more than just science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. It is about building creativity and getting kids thinking about things differently. And you've got a lot of different strategies that you use to connect that with your students. So do you want to share some of the ideas and some of the things that you do with your students?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So yeah, I'm a huge proponent of creativity. I'm a student of creativity myself. So anytime I can learn more about it and what makes the brain work and how to get people thinking more creatively, I like to ponder that. And I think students are like, we get to this point in our lives where we don't think we're very creative, and because everybody's an artist when they're a kid, and they don't care how amazing or poorly drawn their people or their tree or their house is. They just do it and they love it. But when you start, I think there comes a time in our lives where we realize that like this drawing might not be as good as a professional artist's drawing or painting, and then people start getting self-conscious and they kind of lose what was their inner creativity, right? So you have to like not be afraid to fail, and I like to play with those ideas in my classroom and allow students to maybe be creative and they're not realizing it, or teach them that it's okay if they're trying something and they fail at it. Because as we both know as big Disney fans, I like to lean on Meet the Robinsons, right? That's one of my
Oh,
favorite Disney
yes.
movies, because that idea of like every time you fail, you have a party, because failure leads to you learning something about it and kind of bettering yourself. And I tend to take that approach in my classroom. So this year I was kind of lucky to teach this course called Literary Expressions. And it's a course that revolves around it's like a self-help book in a way about Da Vinci and his proponents of life. And it's called, oh my God, I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but it's like the Da Vinci Way. It's something like that. And I'm sure if you just searched Da Vinci creativity book, it would be the first one that popped up. But it goes over like, these are the ways you can kind of train your brain to be creative. And that's the way I kind of shaped the course. So the first lesson we did is we studied this part of this Da Vinci book, and then we would practice those things. And they're all about, you know, finding out what is important to you and how you're getting in touch with how you're feeling and what you know and your past and your connections to life, and then using those things to kind of create whatever that may be, poetry and artwork, food, whatever you want to do. I had the students at one point eat ice cream. So I brought in ice cream for them, and it was first period, right? So I kept the ice cream in the athletic department's freezer, and I brought it in, and I was like, all right, pick your ice cream. And I said, now eat this ice cream. And as we eat this ice cream, I don't want us to talk. I just want us to enjoy it and think of all of your memories you have in your life that are associated with ice cream. Like your most powerful memories you have that are associated with ice cream. And they just ate it. And then I had them silently kind of journal those bullet points. Like, where did that take you? What did you think about? And we all started sharing these ideas of ice cream. And of course, like, nobody, maybe some people out there have negative connotations with ice cream, but for the most part, everybody has amazing memories of ice cream with grandparents, with parents, with brothers and sisters, with friends, just sitting on a curb on a city street eating ice cream together. You know, we all have really good ice cream memories. And we were sharing them. And in doing that, what we did was we discovered that we had a lot in common. Even the students who were very different from each other had a ton in common with each other. You might have grown up on the other side of the country in a completely different religion than me, but we share eating ice cream with our grandfather, you know? And taking that and then jumping off into a short haiku or a poem or a short story, where now they had something to write about, that we touched an emotional nerve with them that they probably had not thought that they had going into that experience, right? So something like that really worked to get the kids writing in these creative ways that they had no idea they were doing it, right?
Yeah. And you know, it's funny because as you're talking and you're taking it the writing direction, my brain goes to the data side of things and saying, oh my gosh, you could collect the data on that and start looking for comparisons of how many of us have ice cream memories that are associated with grandparents, and start looking at how all of that overlaps and the commonalities, and kind of create a frequency chart about the different memories. So it's funny. I think it's interesting how that one activity could take students in a lot of different thinking directions.
Yeah, and there's those things are all around us, right? It just becomes like we're not asked to do those things. And when we ask people to do those things, they realize that they have more to offer to the creative field than they thought they did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing this thing right now with my freshmen because we talked a little bit about distance learning, and the most engaged activities are ones that deal with like social emotional learning. And we're writing a poem that we're going to submit to a competition, and the poems that I have them writing are based in an experience they've had in quarantine so far. So what are your feelings and opinions in quarantine, and how can we kind of stretch those out? And the first drafts I got back were really powerful, really open, very vulnerable. And they were a little bit like generic at first because these students aren't used to reading and writing a ton of poetry. But when I looked at it and was like, hey, this is awesome, but in every one of them, there was like one or two small ideas that I thought were brilliant, that if they expanded on those one or two things, this could be a really unique original poem. So I responded to each and every student with, this is great. What about this one or two things you mentioned here? What about just making your poem about that thing? And the majority of them were like, I never would have thought of that. This is like awesome. And they're really excited now to go back and write their next draft because they had somebody there to kind of give them some feedback and say, this is great, try this now, right? I think in my film class too, I taught film and literature last year, which was one of the most, I love film. Like I'm a huge movie buff, and kind of teaching that class was a lot of fun. I never went to film school or anything. I had a couple film classes, but I feel like I know it a lot, right? I know I have a lot of friends who are making films. So I kind of like, I bring them into my classroom to talk about filmmaking. But one of the things we did in there was we played a lot with light and sound. So I would have the kids kind of create Lego like I had a ton of Legos in my classroom, and I would have them create like little Lego scenes, and then they would have to uniquely light the scene. So they had to create a mood, and then figure out how, just using the things in the classroom, they could light that to create a certain mood. And they had to get super creative about, diffusing light through, maybe it was plastic that was colored with green Crayola marker. Maybe it was Scotch tape over their phone flashlight and then coloring half of it red and half of it yellow. Maybe it was, shining through a paper towel roll to get a spotlight. And they had to get very creative with how they did that. And then they presented their photos and talked about their process and how they came up with what they did. And I thought that was super cool. So we're adding like a little bit of that science, right? Adding a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
science in English, because filmmaking is science. It's
Oh
kind of,
yeah.
right? It's storytelling and science blended together in an amazing way. So they were allowed to then kind of jump off and be creative, but then also have to back up what they did in writing and in a presentation to the class. So we're working in those English skills.
I love that. So at the college level, I sometimes get to teach a visual literacy course, and it is my absolute favorite course to teach. And we have a whole unit on kind of decoding the lighting and the shots of film. And I actually might steal that activity, because what a fun way to kind of then think about how you're using the lighting as part of your visual vocabulary um, to get a message across. The moody lighting versus the bright lighting, the high key, the low key. I love that idea. And when you start thinking too about STEM and STEAM, it is about building those communication skills and how do we communicate clearly to each other. And that kind of, so much of our world is communicated visually,
Well,
that
I
understanding
want to
that.
add on to that too. Like, speaking of communication, I would have like 30 students in that class, and they're working in groups of 5. So there's 6 groups. Some of the groups would want the lights to be turned off. And so they say, can I have everybody's attention? Do you guys mind if we turn off the lights for like 2 minutes? And then, so there was a lot of cross communicating in the entire class too. And generally nobody was sitting out. Like, even in all the groups, all the kids had a hand in kind of doing that. They might not all have presented. They might not have wanted to do the little write up about what they learned, but they were all kind of involved in communicating in that process of creating that lighting mood, which was pretty fun.
Yeah, I would love to see some of those images. I bet you they're very cool.
That was all on my old school computer. I might, you know what? No. I did a blog post about it.
Oh,
So,
cool.
so I should have some of those images on my blog. I can send you the link to that story.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I posted, and I think I posted my favorite one. So there should be
Oh,
some
good.
photos.
So, we talked a little bit about this whole idea of how we're remote learning now. Are there things that you found worked well in the classroom that aren't working as well remotely, things you've had to shift? Kind of what has that looked like, and what are you seeing is working well or not working?
Yeah, it's different. It's difficult and it's different. And it's like, a lot of the teachers keep saying like we're all first year teachers again, because no matter how long you've taught, nobody has taught this way to high school students, right? I mean, I know there's certain districts in our area, and even our schools consider doing like a blended learning thing, right? Where the
Mm-hmm.
students might be in class for 2 or 3 days a week, and the other days they're just allowed to work on their own. So they can come in late, they can leave early, wherever that class is. So it's more like college in that way. But we're far from just doing e-learning or online classes in the high school setting.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the students, I like to say that, like, imagine if you had a third of the kids who were always with you and they'll do the work whatever you want, however you wanted them to do, and then you have maybe a quarter of the kids who would never do the work. I mean, that's a little high, but you know what I'm saying? Like, let's just assume a quarter of them who wouldn't do the work regardless. And then you have all the rest who are doing it because you're there helping them over their shoulder, guiding them, answering their questions. But now they really don't have that outside of the classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of those kids are starting to fall off a little bit, and it becomes, how do you reach those students? And parents are getting unlimited amount of emails every day from teachers, especially parents that have little ones, and they're getting emails from those teachers and our teachers and our administration. And it's a lot. And a lot of the parents have to now teach the little ones as well.
Hmm.
So our students, our high school students, are just like, man, I can sit in my room all day and play Fortnite. How do you combat that, right? How do you
Right.
then? So you have to kind of make your lessons hopefully a little bit more engaging. And I've stopped emailing parents. I'm now calling home because they're getting so many
Yeah.
emails. A phone call makes much more difference. And since I started calling home instead of emailing and creating lessons that are a little bit more emotionally engaging, like this poetry assignment I'm doing is working very well. With my seniors, I had them write a letter to freshmen because our school is doing this thing where they try to get seniors, as many as possible, to write letters to freshmen that they then share with the freshmen. So I made that one of my assignments, and I had something like a 90% turn-in rate on that letters to freshmen assignment, and they were really good letters. So creating assignments that allow students to be like human and connected emotionally and in human ways have really worked. And I think teachers that are still kind of trying to do this very stringent skills-based thing is not working very well.
Yeah.
They're having some.
I like that idea of kind of emotionally authentic and having things that kind of connect and acknowledge what they're going through now. I've heard several teachers, and you hear this all the time, about how we're living history right now, and the things that our students and that we are creating are going to be the artifacts that future historians will look back at and kind of try to understand what we were going through at this time. And so having students creating those things in a very meaningful way is that authenticity that sometimes engages them in a different way.
Well, I'm hoping teachers, like, this should be a learning experience for all of us, right?
Hmm.
So, you're learning right now that these things are engaging kids who you've maybe never seen engaged. Maybe next year start with those things. Like,
Hmm.
no, maybe this is a little bit more important than learning the vocabulary for a classic novel. Maybe they'll take more out of these things into the real world. So it's very definitely a learning process for everybody involved. And you also learn too that, like, the tech side of it at our school, a lot of our teachers are using different learning platforms, right? So we have a lot on Google Classroom. We have a lot of teachers who use iTunes U, and there's even a couple other platforms. And it's like, if we were all on the same platform, things may be a little bit easier for
Hmm.
the the dissemination of information, and how we go about doing things. If we're all on the same page, it can make things a lot easier. So there's a learning curve to all of this that I don't think any of us are walking away from this not learning anything.
Right. I did a workshop yesterday for some teachers, and I was surprised how much I gained from it just preparing to get the teachers what they needed. And so, yeah, just by adapting, we're learning so much that we can now take back and say, well, how is that going to impact me moving forward? How's that going to change my own practice as we kind of emerge out of this into something new?
Yeah. And like creative resources, talking about creativity, like, I have a couple teachers who are teaching clay right now, but can't really get the kids clay. And if we did, we don't want students to come to the building and pick up bags of clay either, because we don't want to put anybody in an unsafe situation. So
Hmm.
now we have a lot of teachers, like piano, right? If we have a piano class that in our department, and if a kid doesn't have a piano, student doesn't have a piano at their house or a keyboard, what do you do?
Yeah.
And guitar, right? So if they didn't take a guitar home, what do you do? So now we had to make some interesting amendments to the curriculum in that way too. So this really kind of stretches your creativity as well.
Hmm. So, kind of some final thoughts. So, for teachers who are looking at ways that they could incorporate more creative activities or get the kids thinking creatively, kind of pushing into those other content area classes, what are some tips that you have for teachers on ways to build student creativity?
I would say, and this is coming from just me and the way I learn, that you can't, it's hard to kind of instill creativity into students if it's not a priority in your own life, right? So if I'm not out there seeking creative, like doing new things and expanding my mind and trying to become better at different things, it's going to be hard for me to ask my students to do the same thing. So I would say to those teachers, you have to try new things. Like I watched a lot of documentaries on creativity as well, and what I found was like a lot of the most creative minds in the world have dipped their toes into like multiple lakes, and they, like, some of the most creative engineers have spent time going to culinary school, because the way science interacts with food, they'll learn something about the way, you know, this interacts at their lab or whatever they're doing here. So the more experiences you have in life, the more unique angles you will see different things at. So I think I encourage teachers to get out there and try new things all the time, and to search out those things, like look up articles and documentaries about creativity and see what other people are doing, because there's some amazing things that people are doing to just sharpen their creative tool that is their mind, that I would not have thought about. There's a ton on Netflix alone just about creativity, and I think the more we explore what that is, the easier it is for us to grab onto, know that it's exciting and fun, and then share that with our students.
Yeah. Have you read the book Creativity Inc., the story of Pixar?
No.
That's another good one to kind of think about the creative forces behind Pixar.
Okay, I will definitely check that out. And I really do have a whole collection of creativity books downstairs. Like, I'm working my way through them. Like, I really gotten into, wabi sabi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've really gotten into like the Japanese art wabi sabi, and kind of how finding like beauty and imperfection. And I think that's really helped me explain things to my students as well, where it's like, look, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like,
Yeah.
actually, the imperfection is beauty, right?
Yeah.
Because perfection is almost unachievable. So why bother at this perfection? It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, this has been a pleasure. I am so excited that we had an opportunity to kind of chat and share some ideas. Um, Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Great. Well, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.